On the 30th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler disappeared into his study inside of the Fuhrerbunker deep in the heart of Berlin, whilst the Soviet Red Army was smashing artillery into the city. Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, was in ruins, and the situation was dire for those who remained besides their dictator, who had now acknowledged that the war was lost, and he then made preparations for his death, and even made his will. He went inside his personal office with his wife of a matter of hours, Eva Braun, and no one would enter that room until a gunshot was then heard. The child who was on the outside cried out, "That one was a bullseye," and as a number of Hitler's adjutants and inner circle went into the room, it was clear that the dictator was dead. There has been much debate throughout the decades about what actually happened to the dictator, but it is mostly accepted by historians that Hitler did die inside of his bunker, and that following his death his remains were taken out of the bunker to the garden of the Reich Chancellery and then dealt with. But what happened to the bones of Hitler after this? Today we lift the lid on the decades-long mystery. Welcome to The Untold Past. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Hitler had made arrangements before his death for a significant amount of petrol, of which there was a shortage, to be brought to the bunker, ready to deal with his remains. He had known that days before Mussolini and his mistress had been executed, and their bodies were then strung upside down from a service station in disgrace, and they were subjected to terrible treatment in front of the baying crowd. Hitler knew that if his remains were not dealt with after his death immediately, then this would be the fate that he would face, and this would also happen to Eva Braun, and he knew that his morbid face would be in all the newspapers. Because of this, after Hitler's body was discovered inside of his study, it was taken up the stairs of the bunker's emergency exit into the Reich Chancellery garden, outside where there had been a huge amount of bomb craters caused by the Soviet Red Army's constant shelling. The body of Hitler had been wrapped in a rug, and Eva Braun's was also dealt with, and it was then placed in a bomb crater and was doused in petrol. Hitler's corpse, it was said, had been partially covered by the rug, but some witnesses did recognise him, and the top of his head had not been covered, neither were his legs or feet. There was initially a problem with setting fire to the body, and Heinz Linger, his valet, went inside and grabbed some paper, which was then set on fire and thrown onto the bodies. The bodies were set on fire, and a group including Martin Bormann, Heinz Linger, Otto Gürnscher, Erich Kempka, Joseph Goebbels, Peter Hergel, Ewald Lindorf, and Hans Reiser stood as the flames rose. The group issued a final Hitler salute as they watched the flames get higher. Some, including Heinz Linger, monitored the body of Hitler throughout the next few hours, and he ordered Heinz Krüger and Werner Schweidel to carry the rug out of the study and the bunker, which was blood-stained, and then to burn it too. The corpses were burned in the open, and a huge amount of fuel was later added as the hours passed to reduce the remains of Hitler to almost nothing. There is some debate as to the remains of Hitler and how much they could have actually been reduced to ash. He was being burned in the open, and not inside a sealed crematoria oven, for example, meaning that the burning would not have been as complete. It's claimed that the remains were a pile of charred bones and ashes which when touched fell apart. The ashes at roughly 6:30 p.m. were covered up inside the bomb crater as the bombs continued to fall. The Soviets captured the Reich Chancellery on the 2nd of May 1945, and over the next few days there were investigations conducted inside of the garden as to the whereabouts of Hitler's remains. The Soviets knew that Hitler was dead, and it was later confirmed in a letter to Stalin that, on the 5th of May, on the basis of witness statements of an inmate, the officer of the security police of the Reich Chancellery, Oberstarführer Mengershausen, 2 burned bodies of a man and a woman were discovered and exhumed in the city of Berlin in the grounds of the Reich Chancellery, near to the emergency exit of the bunker. The bodies were found in a crater created by a shell and covered with a layer of earth. They were so badly burned that without additional data they could not be identified. What had been found was the dental remains of Hitler and Eva Braun, and a collection of their bones and ashes. Stalin himself was anxious to release this information to the public, as the Soviet authorities worked their best to try and identify the remains. Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda were discovered close by, and these were fairly easy to identify, and they were harrowingly still recognisable based on the fact that the bodies were not well burned. But what was discovered of Hitler was the famous maxillary bridge, made mostly of gold, and part of his broken mandible. A dental assistant who had worked for Hitler's dentist, along with a technician, on the 11th of May 1945, then identified the bridgework as Hitler's. Later forensic investigation in 2017 proved that the dental remains that were inside of the Soviet archives, including the teeth, were actually said to have been in perfect agreement with the X-rays taken of Hitler's mouth and face in 1944. Even the tartar on the teeth was analysed, and this showed that the teeth belonged to someone who ate mostly plant fibres and a vegetarian diet, like Hitler did. But what was strangely discovered was that Hitler did not die through gunshot through the mouth, adding further evidence that he actually shot himself through the temple. A report by the Soviets written claimed that the presumed body of Hitler, no visible signs of severe fatal damage or illness were discovered on the fire-damaged body. The presence in the oral cavity of the remains of the crushed glass capsule, the obvious smell of bitter almonds coming from the corpse, and the results of the forensic analysis of the internal organs, with the direction of cyanide, led the Commission to conclude that in the present case death was caused by cyanide poisoning. So this report claimed that Hitler actually died from consuming a cyanide capsule, the same type that in fact Joseph Goebbels had consumed, as the same chemical compound was found on the remains. But now what happened to the remains of Hitler, and how did they end up inside of a Soviet archive? The bridgework was separated from the remains, and the body of he and Eva Braun was placed inside of wooden ammunition boxes, and these were stored on the 6th of May 1945 inside the new headquarters of Schmersch in Buch, a district in Berlin. They were then moved around, and Hitler's remains were united with those of the Goebbels family, who had also died in the bunker and around it, and the remains then made their way to Rafnau, a small town around an hour's drive from Potsdam. The body of Hitler had been buried in Rafnau to allegedly avoid treasure hunters. It was claimed that in a report, and I quote, "The grave has been flattened out at ground level, and small pine seedlings have been planted on the surface, forming the number 111. The bodies have been buried at a depth of 1.7 metres, and placed in the following order from east to west: Hitler, Braun, Eva, Goebbels, Magda Goebbels, Krebs, the Goebbels children." The bodies had been moved secretly, but they were moved yet again to Magdeburg in February 1946. They were then reburied on the grounds of a Schmersch facility set up there, and they remained there until 1970, when the facility was then handed over to East Germany. But then a covert and undercover mission took place to exhume the remains of Hitler and the others, and then to destroy the remains once and for all. KGB director Yuri Andropov was the one who authorised the remains to be dug up and then destroyed. Specific instructions were produced for the exhumation and desecration. Firstly, it was said, 2 to 3 days before the start of the works on the burial place, the men of the protection platoon of the Special Department of the KGB have to set up a large enough tent for the activities covered by this plan of action to be carried out beneath it. Secondly, the protection of means of access to the tent after its establishment must be carried out by the soldiers, and when this work is being carried out, by the operational personnel, specifically dedication to Operation Archive. Thirdly, organise a hidden post from which to supervise a house near to the side of the operation and inhabited by the local population, in order to detect any potential visual observation. In the case of the discovery of any such operation, take measures to counteract it on the basis of the current situation. Fourthly, perform the excavation at night, place the remains found in specially prepared boxes, evacuate them in vehicles of the engineering regiments and armoured vehicles of the group of Soviet forces in Germany, in the region of the Rotten Lake, or incinerate them and throw the ashes into the lake. Fifthly, document the execution of the activities indicated on the plan by writing of acts of exhumation of the interred remains, acts of incineration of the contents of the interment. The acts must be countersigned by all operation agents. Sixthly, after the removal of the remains, the place where the interment took place must be returned to its original state. The tent must be removed 2 to 3 days after the major work was complete. The Soviet forces took great steps to ensure that the exhumation of Hitler's remains did not get out into the local area and to knowledge. The exhumations took place and the destruction of Hitler's remains, or what was left, took place on the 5th of April 1970. It was confirmed in a top-secret document that, according to the plan of Operation Archive, the special group consisting of the head of the special unit of the KGB in the Council of Ministers of the USSR UM number 92626, Colonel Kovalenko, and the military men of the same unit, Commander Chirikov VL and Senior Lieutenant Gemeniuk VG, on the 5th of April 1970, had incinerated the remains of war criminals after removing them from their place of burial in the military town of Westenstrasse near House 36. The destruction of the remains was effected by means of their combustion on a pyre on waste ground near to the town of Schönebeck, 11 kilometres from Magdeburg. The remains were burned, crushed to ashes with coal, collected and thrown into the river Biederin, which is confirmed by the present act. So 25 years after the death of Adolf Hitler, the charred remains, or ashes, that the Soviets had taken possession of inside the Reich Chancery garden were dealt with once and for all, along with the remains of his wife Eva Hitler, or Eva Braun, the Goebbels family, and General Krebs, who died inside the bunker. There was a huge amount of disinformation leaked regarding the death of Hitler, and still today there are many questions that people have. The remains of the Fuhrer of Nazi Germany were thrown inside of the Biederin River after their cremation, and it is surprising that for decades they had existed on Earth, held within the secret Smersh facility, very well hidden. But they were then dealt with once and for all. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.